You don't remember the exact day, but you remember the feeling. Your presence that once seemed to light up the room started to become a source of discomfort. Subtleties, little reactions, silences that weren't pauses but abysses. You smiled, and on the other side came an automatic wave, a distant gaze, or that question that never comes, how are you really doing? That's when it all began. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a scandal, it was a realization. To realize that your hug was received, but not desired, that your company was accepted, but not celebrated, that your name was remembered, but never called with longing. You were there, but your presence wasn't cherished, it was endured, and this began to gnaw at you. Not because you were weak, but because your heart is too sensitive to pretend. Do you know what it feels like to realize you are being tolerated? It's walking into a room and feeling like your energy is unwelcome, even without saying a word. It's trying hard to be pleasant, and realizing that even so the other person wants you on a lower volume, lower intensity, less truth, less presence. You started to ask yourself, am I too much? And without realizing it, you began to shrink yourself. You started to break yourself into smaller pieces, more digestible pieces. You silenced your opinions, hid your joys, calmed your pain so you wouldn't seem dramatic. And deep down, and you hoped to be loved for that. But what you received was just this: tolerance. You started to notice, with a silence so loud that even the air changed when you arrived, and no matter how much you tried to deceive yourself, your soul knew, this is not love. Love doesn't make you shrink. Love doesn't tire of listening to you. It doesn't measure words to tolerate you. It doesn't respond out of obligation. Love doesn't invite you out of politeness. It doesn't treat you as if it's a favor. You began to realize, guys, that people only sought you out when they needed something, that they only praised you when they had an interest, that they only kept you close for convenience, but to truly value you, to see you in your entirety, no one stayed, and that was gradually destroying your sense of worthiness. You found yourself in situations you swore you would never accept, shallow relationships, one-sided friendships, family that only praises you when you are silent, and even so, you stayed, trying to make it work, because deep down you still believed that love was something to be earned, and not something received for who you are. Have you noticed how some people only tolerate you? It's subtle, but devastating. You talk about something you love, and the person changes the subject. You share a hurt, and they say someone else has suffered more. You share an achievement, and they feel threatened. That's what tolerance is. It's when your light becomes a burden for others. It's when your pain becomes an annoyance. Your joy becomes a threat. Your presence becomes too much. And then you go silent. Not for peace, but out of fear of being rejected. The worst loneliness is the kind felt next to someone. It's when you are accompanied but invisible, present but absent in the other's perception, being useful but not being loved. You realized you were in that place. You saw that instead of a bond, you were a burden disguised as affection. And the cruelest part, you started to believe that this was normal. You began to doubt what you felt. You started asking yourself if you were exaggerating. You began to rationalize others' coldness as stress or their way. But your intuition was not lying. It pulled you by your breath, by the tear-filled eyes with no explanation, by your tired body even after a good night's sleep. You were being tolerated, not loved. Do you know when it became clearer? At the moment you needed someone the most, when life broke you, when everything collapsed, when your soul cried out for comfort and received an automatic shallow response, or worse, didn't receive any response at all. It was in that moment that the truth hit you, when the mask of coexistence fell off too, when you realized you were not indispensable, that you were not missed. What was optional presence? It hurt. It still hurts. But that's when you started to wake up, because realizing the difference between love and tolerance is painful, but it's also liberating. You stopped begging for attention. You stopped justifying your presence. You stopped pleading for reciprocity. You began to see that those who love you don't measure you, they amplify you. Those who love you don't expect you to change. They celebrate who you are right now. Those who love you aren't tired of your intensity. They drink it in. You realized that you were never too much. You were just in places that were too small for you. That realization changed everything, because from that point on, you stopped trying to fit where there's no space. You started to hear that internal voice that you ignored for years, the voice that said, you deserve more. You deserve to be loved truly, You deserve to exist without having to apologize for it. That voice was your soul, calling you back home. And you know what the cruelest detail of it all is? The person who tolerates you doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. They think they're being kind. They think they're giving you space. They believe that coexistence is proof of affection, but you feel it. You've always felt it. Because your soul can't pretend anymore. It notices. It cries in silence. It crumbles without warning. Until one day, it screams. And you finally listen. You listened. And even though you were scared, even when you were alone, you decided to leave that place. It wasn't a breakup. It was a rupture. A rupture with the logic that love needs to be begged for. A rupture with the emotional addiction to settling for crumbs. A rupture with the pattern of shrinking to be accepted. And deep down, this wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Have you been through this? Share with me in the comments. If this resonated with you, comment, "I needed to hear this." You didn't accept crumbs out of weakness. You accepted them because you learned to confuse absence with presence, silence with peace, indifference with maturity. You were trained to tolerate the lack of love. Since early on, since before you had words to describe what you felt, you grew up shaping yourself, shaping the tone of your voice, shaping the sparkle in your eyes, shaping the way you expressed what you wanted, out of fear of being too much. You learned early that love came with conditions, that to be accepted, you needed to earn it, and to earn it, you needed to behave. And to behave, you had to repress everything that was true about yourself. That's when the wound began. It wasn't in a romantic relationship. It wasn't in a moment of obvious rejection. It was in the accumulation of small experiences that taught you that being yourself came at a cost. Being spontaneous, it caused discomfort. Being vulnerable left you exposed. Being intense that pushed people away. You realized this while still a child. You noticed that your tears were viewed as drama, your joy as exaggeration, your silence as disobedience. And over time you learned not to feel too much, not to want too much, not to expect too much. You were trained to be easy to get along with, and that killed parts of you. Do you remember the first time you felt ashamed of being sensitive? The first time hiding what you felt seemed safer than showing it? The first time you found yourself swallowing what you wanted to say, to avoid causing discomfort? These memories get trapped in the body, in the tight throat, in the racing chest, in the anxiety you couldn't explain, because every time you were too something, you received less love. And then, without realizing it, you created a survival mechanism. If I am easy to get along with, maybe they'll love me. If I'm quiet, maybe they'll stay. If I don't bother them, maybe they'll choose me. That maybe became your guiding star, and you started to lose yourself. Then life went on, but that pattern remained. You grew up, but the fear stayed the same size. Fear of being a bother, fear of seeming intense, fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind. And that's how you began to accept tolerance in place of love. Not because you didn't know what love was, but because your emotional system was shaped to accept so little, to think the problem was you, to justify the coldness of others, to normalize unbalanced relationships. You trained yourself to give a lot and expect almost nothing. And when someone treated you with indifference, you called it maturity. When someone didn't get excited by your presence, you called it reserved style. When someone only remembered you in times of need, you called it busy friendship. You created explanations to avoid facing the truth. You were not being loved. You were being used. You were being tolerated. You were being forgotten in small doses, and still you stayed. Have you ever wondered why you stayed? Why you accepted? Why you defended those who hurt you? Why you justified those who erased you? Because you were afraid to realize you were alone. Afraid to look in the mirror and see that, in reality, no one was there for you. It was easier to believe it was love, even if it was unhealthy, even if it was lukewarm, even if it was empty. Easier to believe that than to face the real abandonment. Easier to be in a almost than to fall into nothingness. But that almost is what slowly destroys. Because almost love doesn't save you, but it also doesn't let you go. It's emotional poison. You don't feel like you're dying, but you also never truly live. You realized this. And that's why you decided to look, not with anger, but with clarity. You began to reshape your memories. You returned to that child within you who was trained not to be bothersome. And for the first time, you told her, you don't need to be tolerated. You deserve to be loved. And that changed everything, because you started to see that the problem was never your intensity. The problem was the lack of emotional space in others. You began to see that your sensitivity was not a weakness. It was a radar, a spiritual, emotional, intuitive radar. You've always felt what others tried to hide. You always noticed when you weren't welcome. But you silenced that radar so you wouldn't seem paranoid, so you wouldn't seem unstable, so you wouldn't cause discomfort. You sabotaged yourself to fit in. But now, you've decided to overflow. You're tired of being background scenery in other people's lives, of being a convenient memory, of being used as support but never celebrated as a soul. You realize that those who only seek you out when they need something don't love you. They use you. Those who don't celebrate your victories don't root for you. They tolerate you. Those who don't ask how you are don't see you. They consume you. And now you've decided to break this cycle, not with revenge, but with dignity. You realize that it's not your responsibility to teach anyone how to love you. You are not a lesson. You're a temple. And in this temple, there's no room for people who only know how to consume, who only know how to drain, who only know how to endure. You didn't come to be endured. You came to be light, to be presence, to be love in motion. And it doesn't matter who doesn't understand this. What matters is that now, you see. And to see is a point of no return. What was the first time you experienced something similar? If this text turned you inside out, right, no more crumbs. You realized you weren't loved. You realized you were merely tolerated. And even so, you stayed a little longer. You stayed out of guilt. You stayed out of fear. You stayed because you thought it was unfair to leave like this without warning, as if the other person deserved an explanation you never received. You hesitated, even after realizing, even after feeling deep down that this wasn't love, because those with a full heart take time to leave, even when they know there's no more ground beneath them. Those who truly love, they still try one more time, still justify the silence, still believe they can change things. But there comes a time when your own body starts to scream, your throat tightens, your stomach clenches, your chest burns, and you understand it's no longer possible. But to leave is not just to walk away, it's to go through a mourning. The mourning for who you were in that relationship, the mourning of the role you played for so long, the mourning for everything you invested there, believing it was love. And perhaps the cruelest part, the mourning for something you never really had, but wanted so much to believe it was real. You cried for an illusion, and that cry is legitimate. Crying for someone who never loved you the way you needed does not make you weak. It makes you human, because the heart doesn't just cry for the end. It cries for everything it dreamed of and never lived, for all it gave and didn't receive in return, for everything it endured, hoping for recognition that never came. And then comes the guilt of saying no, the guilt of stepping away, the guilt of leaving the other person alone, even after everything. It's strange, isn't it? You were ignored, tolerated, discarded so many times, yet when it was time to leave, you were the one who felt cruel, because women like you have been trained to care, to embrace, to save, even if it costs their own soul. You thought love was about enduring, about resisting, about never giving up, but now you understand. Love is also knowing when to walk away. You realize that insisting on a place that weakens you is abandoning yourself, and between abandoning the other or abandoning yourself, this time you chose yourself. But there is a price. And the price is dealing with the guilt of someone who, for the first time, did not betray themselves to please. The guilt of someone who was called selfish, simply for saying, enough. The guilt of someone who was called cold, for not begging for more love. The guilt of someone who got tired of giving everything, and now only accepts what is whole. Do you know why this guilt exists? Because you are still unlearning an old pattern, an emotional pattern that said, you're only good if you take care of everyone. You're only worthy if you forgive everything. You're only kind if you never give up. But this pattern emptied you, turned you inside out, taught you to put yourself last, and smile about it. And now as you break this cycle, you feel guilt for something that is actually healing. This guilt, it's the echo of the old version of you, the one who didn't know how to choose. Have you realized that no one ever taught you to prioritize yourself? They never told you that you could choose to leave a place where you were not loved. You were told to be patient, to give it time, to let it go, to yield. But they didn't teach you that loving yourself sometimes means choosing to be misunderstood. It's saying no without explanation. It's stepping away without a farewell letter. It's turning your back even with a heavy heart. You had to learn this on your own, with pain, with grief, with tears hidden in your pillow. And now even with the guilt, you keep moving forward. Because you understood guilt fades but self-neglect repeats. Do you know what the deepest root of guilt is? It's the feeling that you are being unfair, that maybe you overreacted, that perhaps the other person did not know how to love and you should have been more patient. But look back. You have already been too patient. You have kept quiet too much, swallowed too much, waited too much. You tried in every way possible, and still you kept being tolerated, not embraced, not celebrated, not loved. And that's not your fault. That's about how much you ignored yourself trying to be accepted. Now it's time to listen to yourself. You've realized that the greatest abandonment was not from others. It was your own abandonment. Every time you said, "It's all good," when it wasn't. Every time you stayed when you wanted to leave. Every time you smiled when you wanted to cry. Every time you defended those who belittled you. Every time you begged to be seen, that hurts. It hurts like waking up from a trance, like taking off a blindfold and realizing how long you lived in the dark. But it hurts, because now you can see, and seeing is always the beginning of healing. If this text brought you clarity, write, "No more abandoning myself." Have you heard this phrase before? Comment, "I have indeed." And now you find yourself in a new place. Not there anymore and not completely here. A place between grief and freedom, between exhaustion and rebirth, between never again and finally. A place where it still hurts, but you breathe easier, where you still cry, but you feel that something has returned inside you. Your soul, your essence, your voice, your feelings. And if they still ask you why you left, you don't need to explain, just say, "Because I realized." And realizing is the beginning of everything. You realized that you were being tolerated, and you decided that this will never be enough again. Now you want presence, eye to eye, a heart that listens, love that endures. You want vibration, real connection, love that invites you to be more, not less. And do you know the most beautiful thing? You are ready for this now. But there's still one more thing, something you might not have given yourself permission to feel, the joy of being alone. Yes, joy. Because true loneliness is when you're surrounded and invisible, but solitude is when you finally see yourself. And this part of the journey is what we are going to experience in the next chapter. If this video made you think, the next one is going to turn you inside out. Go ahead,